We are now live on our FVE webinar on Newcastle disease, which is joined with FLI, and thank you to our FLI colleagues who are already here. I'm just going to wait a couple of minutes as the numbers tick up. It's 132 attendees, and of course we're also recording, so people will be able to watch back. I am going to say it's a very warm welcome, and it is really very warm. I am in the middle of a heat wave in Cardiff. The temperature here is something around 30 degrees C, which, as you can tell, I'm from the UK and I'm not used to that sort of temperature. So I am going to start the introductions, and I'd be really grateful if Lauren could start to share my presentation, please. Wonderful. Okay, so as I say, this is a recorded webinar, and both the slides and the recording will be shared with all of the participants, but also those of you who've not been able to join us live. It is a Tuesday afternoon, and I know lots of us are very busy. I do want to just remind you that questions for the speakers and also for the panel discussion need to go into the Q&A box rather than the chat. So if you look at the top of your screen, there is the little chat bubble, and next to it is two speaker marks with Q&A underneath them, and please use that for any questions. Next slide, please. Right. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of an intro. As I say, it's a really warm welcome to you all to this joint webinar on Newcastle disease. And what we hope to do is to present the current notifiable disease, Newcastle disease, situation in Europe, and the economic impact of those outbreaks, even though we have a vaccination policy in place. And for those of you who may not be familiar with us, the Federation of Veterinarians of Europe, the FVE, represents more than 330,000 veterinarians in 38 member countries, and that's through our national organisations. You can see that our mission is to promote animal health and welfare, public health and sustainable food systems. So it's really important that we speak about some of the challenges that we're facing. And if we could go to the next slide, please. And these are some of the challenges that we're facing in animal health. And this is, it's the second or third 2026 animal health webinar. But you can see that we've had a whole range in 2025 of webinars focused on major transboundary animal diseases. This is really about thinking about Europeans' capacity for preparedness, prevention and response. And we bring together leading experts from science, regulatory authorities and field practice, as we have today on Newcastle disease. We've started with avian influenza, and we always do think about a One Health approach and strong surveillance, as well as biosecurity and evidence-based control strategies, including vaccination. It's really important that we draw from real-world experiences in countries such as the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, France, and others, highlighting the importance of early detection, outbreak coordination, vaccination and international collaboration. In 2025, we also had a joint webinar with Copa-Cogeca and FISAS on preventive animal health visits. Really important that we are thinking about sustainable livestock systems and working with all of the important players in the livestock food chain. So in 2026, as I say, this is our third, I'm not very good at counting, our third webinar. Our first one was on peste petit ruminant, and then feline infectious peritonitis, and now here we are on Newcastle disease. Events like today's webinar really help us to ensure that veterinary professionals and our stakeholders and people that we work with across the animal health system remain informed, connected, and ready to respond. And if we could move on to the next slide. I just wanted to say a little bit about the current Newcastle disease situation. As you can see, it's actively circulating in Europe, and there have been significant clusters of outbreaks reported in both commercial and backyard flocks in Poland, Spain, Germany, and Lithuania. And we do know that there are risks to unaffected regions, driven potentially by human movement and contaminated equipment, and also the virus spreading through small-scale or captive bird flocks. But I'm not going to talk about Newcastle disease. Our experts are going to do that. And I just wanted, with the final slide before I pass over to them, to mark a centenary. I actually worked as the veterinary lead for avian virology at the Animal and Plant Health Agency in Weybridge. And so it's really quite important to me that we have this platform to engage in discussion of important poultry diseases. And this is a centenary of the discovery, or rather the identification of Newcastle disease 100 years ago in what was then called the veterinary laboratory at Weybridge. Dr. T.M. Doyle was a researcher, and he called it Newcastle disease because these samples came from a farm near Newcastle upon Tyne in England. And in that time, we have developed vaccines, we have developed our biosecurity, our preparedness, and our understanding. But this is what we want to sustain through webinars like this. And there is a centenary event in Weybridge, which has an online option. And in the chat, you will see there is a link to that, or you can use that QR code if you would like to find out more and carry on exploring this topic. As I say, and as a reminder, please do pop all of the questions for our speakers in the Q&A box that you'll see on your screen, and we'll aim to address them in the panel discussions, or if not, then reply in writing or as a readout from this webinar. Just a reminder, we are recording, and the slides and recordings will be shared with all the participants. So I think that's my last slide, Lauren, and we move on to the actual webinar. So we're starting, and I'm really delighted to be handing over to the expert from DG Sante, Carola Sauter-Louis. Actually, no, we're doing that first. We're going to Sanna first, aren't we? There we go. I do apologise. I just did that wrong, Sanna. That was my notes that I hadn't got correct. So I entirely blame myself. Sanna Mesman, the Veterinary Policy Officer at DG Sante. Sanna brings animal health policy expertise relevant to poultry diseases to the EU and has worked in national ministries as well as EU-level animal health governance. We're so happy to welcome this EU-level policy perspective that she will contribute to the webinar discussions. So, Sanna, thank you so much for coming to share your expertise on the subject today. And over to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jane. Thank you so much for this kind introduction. And dear colleagues, dear participants, good to see such a high number of people who are interested in this webinar. I'm really honored to be invited to speak at this webinar, and I'm thanking you also for this program, which is really highly interesting. So I guess I would start a bit boring, but maybe I will give you an overview on the EU rules regarding surveillance, prevention and control measures of Newcastle disease under the animal health legislative framework. So next slide, please. So this is I don't know, many of you might recognize this slide. This is the umbrella that we use a lot. Some hate it, some love it, but it shows indeed under the animal health law that there's many specific parts under which there are implementing regulation and delegated regulations. And I have colored those regulations which are of interest for Newcastle disease and this seminar today, this webinar. I have made them green and yellow as well. The slides will be sent to you after the meeting, so if you cannot see it, quite clearly, then you can look at it afterwards. Most importantly is that you will find rules on listing of diseases, on categories of diseases. You may have heard of list A diseases. Also, we have the Commission Delegated Regulation 2020-689 on the surveillance and eradication of diseases. Another important delegated regulation is the 2020-687 on the prevention and control of diseases, and others you can look at those yourselves, and they will be also mentioned shortly in my overview. Next slide, please. So as I said, there's rules on categorization, on the prevention and control. This you can find in the 2018 number 1882. And here you can see clearly I have also mentioned the highly pathogenic avian influenza, just to show you that basically the same rules apply. It is in the same category as highly pathogenic avian influenza. So Newcastle disease is also subject to immediate eradication measures when confirmed in kept birds. Next slide, please. As regards surveillance, there is a case definition for suspect and confirmed cases. This you can find in Regulation 2020-689 in the mentioned Annex 1, Section 3. There's also rules in this same regulation regarding the early detection of Newcastle disease virus. There is no union surveillance program for Newcastle. So we do have a union surveillance program for highly pathogenic avian influenza, which gives more specific rules on the surveillance. However, for Newcastle disease, the general requirements apply, and those are mentioned in point A of Article 3.1. There is also a possibility to grant a specific status for free from infection of Newcastle disease virus without vaccination. So if member states want to apply this, then they should then implement separate rules which include the screening for the presence of antibodies of all establishments keeping breeding poultry, or they should do a survey on representative sample of establishments. So this, for example, is Finland. Sweden as a member state has just reverted, and they had previously also a status free of infection of Newcastle disease, and they have now stopped this. Next slide, please. As regards the disease prevention and control measures under the animal health law. So as I mentioned before, for Newcastle disease, it's the same as for highly pathogenic avian influenza. It is a category A disease. So we have harmonized measures for the suspicion, the confirmation, and also the notification of a confirmed case should take place within 24 hours in the EU Animal Disease Information System, which is ADIS. I will show you a map later on showing the outbreaks of the past years. In addition, immediate stamping out in the affected establishment is required. A restricted zone should be established. These are all well-known measures from also HPAI. There are measures to be implemented in the restricted zones, such as prohibition of movements. There's rules on repopulation of the affected establishment, and there are also rules regarding vaccination. So all of these aspects, they could be in different parts of legislation under the animal health law. So I did not put exactly the points and the regulations where those requirements are mentioned, but this is like the basic list that you should remember. Next slide, please. So what is new? That is, or at least it is renewed under the Animal Health Law, Article 37. We have established Delegated Regulation 2024-2623, and this is regarding compartments for HPAI and Newcastle disease in the EU. This means that under the general rules, member states may apply for recognition of disease-free status of compartments. So this is different than the geographical zoning that we are used to. So they can do this if the introduction of the disease can be effectively prevented at compartment level, if the compartment is subject to a single common biosecurity management system for all the establishments forming a part of it, and finally, it has been approved by the competent authority of the member state. There are some specific rules, and you can see there that compartments are possible for highly pathogenic avian influenza and for Newcastle disease. The status of the compartment is based on a higher level of biosecurity management and surveillance plans, and those are developed and implemented by the operators and must be verified and approved by the competent authority of the member state. Please remember that this is not an alternative to regionalization or zoning. It is a voluntary mechanism and it's complementing it. It does not replace it, but it will give a higher level of biosecurity. So then in green, you will see that the animals and products originated in compartments which are approved in accordance with this regulation. These are exempted from movement prohibitions applicable in the restricted zone. So this is the added value. It is a costly system, but it will give you something in return. Next slide, please. So as promised, here I will show you a map which is generated from our animal disease information system. I hope you can see it clearly. My screen is a bit small. I hope for you it's better. So I'm showing you the disease situation of the past years. The most interesting part, I think, to remember is the green and the light blue dots, because those are the Newcastle disease outbreaks in 2025 and the Newcastle disease outbreaks in 2026. So those have been significantly higher than in the years before. Next slide, please. Here you can see a breakdown, a summary of the Newcastle disease situation in the past 2 years. So in the EU member states, we have seen 205 outbreaks in poultry. There were 110 in this year. In captive birds, we have seen 240 outbreaks. In 2026, 14.8 million poultry were affected in those outbreaks. They have been either been culled or they were dead. And 57 of those outbreaks were in broilers and fattening turkeys. So as already mentioned in the introduction, and I'm sure that the speakers after me will go into this further, we have seen clusters of poultry outbreaks, notably in Poland and in Germany and in Spain also. So next slide, please. Let me explain a bit about vaccination against Newcastle disease. So we have a rather recent regulation, which is of 2023. It is number 361, and this actually gives the rules on vaccination against List A diseases. So what you will see is that in this delegated regulation, we have not made any specific rules on Newcastle disease. There is a derogation in Article 3.2. Here it says that the conditions for the use of vaccines against Category A diseases shall not apply to certain uses of vaccine against infections with Newcastle disease virus, in particularly to routine precautionary use or to use in the framework of trade that the member states may allow outside of these rules in this regulation. The use of this should be for purposes other than responding to an outbreak. So this delegated regulation basically says that because we are rather used to preventive vaccination, routine vaccination of poultry against Newcastle disease for the purpose of prevention, for the purpose of trade. So therefore we disregarded this kind of vaccination from this regulation. Next slide, please. So it is important to note here that that Newcastle disease is in fact taken into account when you speak of emergency protective vaccination against Newcastle disease. So what is the difference? There are specific rules laid down in this delegated regulation as regards emergency protective vaccination, and it means that the vaccination is implemented in response to an outbreak of this disease, and which is carried out in any of the following cases, and then I have copied for you guys, on terrestrial animals at risk of infections that are kept in establishments located in affected member states or zones thereof, in which category A diseases have not been confirmed nor are suspected. So basically, if you are doing your routine vaccination against Newcastle disease, this is not subject to the rules in the delegated regulation. However, if vaccination is being performed in relation to an outbreak situation, then this delegated regulation applies. Next slide, please. And if so, if the vaccination is taking place in relation to outbreaks that have taken place, it means that certain rules apply, and I have copied just a selection of those for you. In Article 3, it says that the use of vaccines may only be under the control of the competent authority as part of the official measures put in place by the competent authority. Article 5 says that the decision of the competent authority should be based on a risk assessment and criteria. And the criteria are laid down in Annex 2 of this regulation. Vaccines shall also be used in accordance with an official vaccination plan, and this vaccination plan, or at least the required points thereof, are listed in Annex 3 of this delegated regulation. Then you have Article 10, which says that the competent authority shall specify the type of vaccines to be used or prioritized, and it should implement reinforced clinical and laboratory surveillance. And also this is described in the regulation. Then there's also other rules that apply regarding record keeping, reporting, biosecurity, etc. Final slide, please. So I was asked to list also some lessons learned. Well, if you look back further than 2026, 2025, we could really say that EU rules, if correctly put in place, are effective to eradicate Newcastle disease outbreaks. Member states take those measures, and they, if applied correctly, then the situation is solved really quickly. We also see that the EU regionalization is effective to prevent the spread by legal movements. So this is just the same as for highly pathogenic avian influenza. We also see that vaccination is an effective preventive tool if it is correctly performed, if there's sufficient coverage, and if it is complementary to appropriate biosecurity measures. So, of course, we have a new situation of the past period, and we have seen outbreaks also in places where preventive vaccination has been taking place. I'm sure the speakers after me will go into that as well. So, following the recent developments in 2025-26, we have requested EFSA for scientific and technical assistance regarding the outbreaks we have seen. And also, we want to know if the vaccination and the vaccines are still sufficient and efficient. So that was my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanna, and a great transition to our next speakers. Brilliant insight and really important for us to understand the legal framework that we're all working within. And so if I could call on our next speakers, Carola Sauter-Louis and Christian Grund from the Friedrich Lofer Institute. Carola is a board-certified veterinarian specializing in epidemiology and veterinary public health and is currently the head of the Institute for Epidemiology at the FLI, the German Federal Research Institute for Animal Health, and professor at the Faculty of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences in Rostock. We can hear you, don't worry. And Christian is the head of the WOA, World Organization for Animal Health, and National Reference Lab for Newcastle Disease, and is a recognized veterinarian specialist in poultry, game, ornamental, and zoo birds, as well as the WOA reference expert for Newcastle Disease. Welcome to you both. I shall now hand over to your presentation, and we are looking forward to your insights as well. Carola and Christian.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your interest and thanks for being here. And thanks to Sanna, because she actually mentioned quite a lot of things. I would like to present a little bit about the European situation and then sort of interweave the German situation in there. And in Germany, we were really lucky then for 30 years, we didn't have any problems with Newcastle disease, but that changed dramatically since end of February. And as Sanna already mentioned, looking back into the last years, in early 2024, there was a notification in Italy, and then I just go this one, my mouse here. And then in September 2024, it was introduced in the east of Poland, and there it sort of like spread in the immediate vicinity. So it just looks the same as one dot, but it's actually several farms. And then in November 2024, it spread in Poland, and it also jumped to the Czech Republic border. And by March 2025, there was already spread within Poland, but it also jumped to the Polish-German border. And Sanna already mentioned it. We distinguish between the red points, which are the commercial farms, and the orange dots, which are the non-poultry one. And you can see that in March 25, we already had some close to the German border. In April 25, it was then introduced into the Czech Republic, and there it spread, and that's sort of the picture you saw in December 25. So further spread in Poland and Czech Republic. And also we had an introduction into Spain, but that was a different genotype. And so in January, we already had sort of a high infection pressure at the eastern side of Germany. And that was for us the reason to mention it in our monthly risk assessment, which is the radar bulletin. And so we warned already our veterinarians in Germany. And so in February 26, we had the introduction into Germany, and Christian will tell you more about the virus type. And this is sort of the situation which Sanna also showed. And you can see that there are still cases in Poland, in Germany, and in the Czech Republic. And if we look at the European situation, taking the data out, what Sanna mentioned with ADIS, then if we just look at the two last lines or the three last line, in the Czech Republic, we only have the non-poultry. So that we have 33 outbreaks so far in 26. And in Poland, we have the commercial and the smallholders. And they are sort of roughly about the same numbers. So you have the same number of commercials and the same number of smallholders throughout the years 25 and 26. When we look when the disease occurred, then we sort of have in red, it's the commercial farms, in green, it's the non-poultry. And we don't see such a clear seasonal occurrence like we see in HPII. We have some peaks and some seasonality, but it's not that it's only the winter months. When we look at that for the commercial farms, yes, we have some peaks in the winter months, but we also have occurrences last summer. And when we looked at, because there was one big question in Germany, what is the mortality which we see in those farms? And when we look at the data, we sort of see that on the top graph, you see the commercial farms, on the bottom one, you see the smallholders. And especially in the commercial holdings, the mortality, the percent of dead animals is well below 2%. So we have some which have higher, but the most part are really below 1% or even below 0.5%. That is different in the smallholders. The smallholders, you have mortalities up to 100%. And Sanna already presented that. And I think, no, I didn't. I go back again. We have here in Europe, we sort of have about half the affected herds are broiler herds, and then we have about a quarter of the laying hens. In Germany, it's actually slightly different. We have about 3/4 of our affected herds are laying hens, and 1/4 is broiler or less than a quarter, and then a few turkey. And when we look, and that's pretty much the same also in Germany, in most herds, you actually find clinical signs. So on the left side, you have the commercial sides, the commercial farms, and on the right side, you have the smallholders. And the red ones, they are the ones which have no clinical signs, where you didn't see anything in the animals, and the green ones are the one where you have clinical signs. And so you can see that we have actually clinical signs in most of the herds. The current situation in Germany is that we have, in the meantime, we have 69 outbreaks, of which 20 are in Bavaria. And I'll just take that off here. And we have 49, we have in Brandenburg and Berlin, and there we also have some smallholders. And that's what I showed you before earlier in comparison to Poland. We have 20 in Bavaria, of which are 3 smallholders. And we have 49 in Brandenburg, Berlin, of which are 8 smallholders. So in our case, it's really the commercials which are much more affected than the smallholders. And the other thing which Sanna also mentioned, the animals affected, is we have here in Germany over 4 million, and that's sort of roughly about the same number as we have with HPII. We've got a cluster here, so that's our Brandenburg cluster, and that's our Bavaria cluster. But we've got one here, and that's sort of the pigeons. So that's a different virus, and maybe Christian can tell more about that. And just briefly, it's the commercial holdings. They were all vaccinated. The vaccination strategies, they are currently compared. Mostly they had very good or good biosecurity, and we had separate epidemiological units, and nevertheless they were affected. What we saw was that the younger animals with lower protection, they showed very clear clinical signs, while the older animals with good protection, they partly showed no clinic or low clinic despite being positive. And with that, I hand over to Christian.
Yes, thank you very much. We were asked to cover certain topics. So let's start with the current knowledge on the circulating NDV strains. And that basically is a collaboration with the European Reference Laboratory. On the left hand, it shows all the sequences available from those different countries. If you take out larger view on it, then you see in red the Turkey, the first case in Germany, and it's embedded in sequences from the Czech Republic, from the Lithuania, but also from Poland on the bottom. And if you then later on compare those certain isolates from Germany, this is on the right-hand side, you see they are almost identical. So it's really one episode that it's running. From the definition side, yes, it's a virulent virus with a polybasic cleavage site, and it belongs to the genotype 7.1.1. And basically, based on the available information, you can't really pinpoint it to a certain country. So we tend to talk about the East European cluster, indicating that, it's a common epidemiological unit going on there. So then, of course, it was mentioned in Germany, vaccination is mandatory. Why didn't it grab, or where are the cornerstones? Well, it's an old debate whether we need to improve the vaccines, and there are basically two major points about that. The Dutch had a really nice work on it back then when the genotype 7.2 was around in Germany, and they clearly showed that it did not really make a difference. It depended on how good you vaccinate. That made the difference. The Americans indicated that there might be some differences in the spread, but they fail, actually, I would say, to demonstrate the biological relevance. Nevertheless, both and all the others works that can be cited say that the vaccines are protecting against crossover the different genotypes, against mortality. So there might be some small reduced shedding, but as I said, it has to be validated with transmission studies. But at the end, it is clear that you really need a robust immune response. So the higher the antibody response, so the more the animal had to fight or faced with the vaccine, the better it is. Okay. So, and then, as it was said, yes, in Germany, we observed that well-vaccinated chickens were protected clinically, but they were not protected from infection. And at the end, if you ask why didn't it work, then every people working in the field certainly knows the challenges of vaccination and what might go wrong with vaccination. So I just hinted a few sides, and because before we talk about vaccine failure, we should make sure that the vaccination protocol itself are sufficient. And I in particular like to point out the small percentage of non-responders in a flock. I highlighted this in the serological data on the left-hand side that basically did not respond well to the vaccine. So basically, there are the entrance point for the virus, and they can really make the difference. Why do I think, or what is known about those genotypes? On the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, you see the phylogeny. And I'll show you, without going into detail, map on the antigenicity. And basically, if you look at the top, there you have the antigen, and the green circle indicates these are the vaccines, genotype 2 vaccines, and they are reacting against the homologous strain with a titer of 8.8. If you go to the right, then you see, yes, there are some minor differences to genotype 7, to different one of genotype 7, but basically they show a really good, strong cross-reactivity, and that is our experience. And in particular, if you vaccinate more than one time, that this is certainly more stable. Why can there be nevertheless differences between those strains? We have one experiment with a genotype 14 from Nigeria, and there we clearly could show that compared to an old vaccine or to an old strain that needed 5 times 10 to the 5, so 500,000 infectious units to infect an animal. If you take then a genotype 7 strain, you in the 10 or 3,000 infectious units did the job. So this virus is much more infectious, let's put it this way. So you need less virus to infect the animals. However, if you compare then in well-vaccinated layer chickens, you see that against both vaccines or against both strains, the vaccine was able to protect. What I did not show you is that nevertheless, the genotype 14 was more successful in spreading the virus. Okay, so for me, it's more that we have to take care of the biological properties. And then the last question, why outbreaks occur? I don't have a definite answer. I have to admit, I'll show you something. But for me, the most important part is here that under the umbrella of vaccination, you will find silent spread of the virus. And this is shown basically even with maternal-derived antibodies. This is a study we have done in 2014. It was based, or we tried to evade immune response as a vector vaccine. Nevertheless, I like to point out to the right-hand side, you see there are animals without vaccination on day 28 with maternal-derived antibodies, and you see first of all the clinical curve. Only one of those animals showed clinical disease. None died, but nevertheless they shed the virus. The vaccinated animals, they shed less virus. So in both groups, so like broilers, you won't see with maternal-derived antibodies that much of the clinical disease. You need to do virological testing in order to see whether the virus is present here, yes or no. The good thing is, yes, with a good vaccination, infection is done within 10 days. Nevertheless, please take into account that in a flock level, that's a totally different story. It will take much longer. Okay.
Christian, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. This is absolutely brilliant. We're out of time, but please just close off and do carry on, because the challenges are so important. And remind everyone that you will share these slides, so all of this information will be available. Sorry to interrupt you, Christian. We've just got so many interesting speakers. We should have done twice the length of the webinar, shouldn't we?
Okay, that's fine. Just a final statement, this is our opinion that beside vaccination, you need other pillars in order to fight Newcastle disease, and one certainly is the early detection in vaccinated flocks. And thank you very much for your attention.
Oh, well, now I feel very guilty, Christian. You were about to finish when I came in. Can I just say that was so interesting. Thank you so much for updating us on the current situation in Germany, but also that insight, that really important insight into the circulating strains and the challenges of vaccination. I'm sure I'm seeing quite a number of comments and questions that are going to come up, and we'll be calling on you later. So thank you, Carola and Christian. I'm now going to hand over to our final presenter, and this is Jakub, and I probably won't get your pronunciation right, Wojciechowski, who's a poultry disease specialist. Close. Poultry disease specialist as a field veterinarian in Poland. He's gained first-hand experience with Newcastle disease in the field, which is so important, you know, that reality of what is happening on the ground. And he will speak about those field perspectives. So, Jakub, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? Good afternoon, everyone. As Jane introduced me, my name is Jakub Wojciechowski, and I am a poultry specialist, a field vet at VetLab Brudzew in Poland. And for the last 15 years, I've been involved in commercial poultry production, especially large-scale production. And today, I would like to step away a bit from theoretical models and maybe show you some experience, some hands-on experience or boots-on-the-ground experience, if you will, on how we manage Newcastle disease here in Poland, and maybe walk you through a specific protocol which we use to ensure the safety of our clients' farms when outbreaks are happening just, let's say, next door. Next slide, please. To understand our strategy, first we must understand the sheer scale of the problem that we are facing. So until July 2023, Poland maintained a stable status of a country free from Newcastle disease. So we were almost 50 years free from that disease. But in July, 4 commercial outbreaks happened, which affected roughly about 80,000 birds. Unfortunately, in 2024, as my previous speakers pinpointed, the situation deteriorated sharply, and by the end of the year, we had a total of 21 commercial outbreaks that affected over 3 million birds that were just infected and died from the disease itself or were culled. But we observed something new. We observed 8 backyard outbreaks. Next slide, please. By 2025, the virus expanded geographically from the eastern hubs to the western and the southern hubs, or voivodeships as we call them here in Poland. And by the end of the year, we had a total of 86 commercial outbreaks and 95 backyard outbreaks. In 2026, the situation remains unfortunately relentless, and we have observed until mid-May only 114 outbreaks, 48 of which are commercial and 66 of which are backyard outbreaks. They are acting as continuous environmental reservoirs, so they are extremely dangerous, but we are addressing this issue and we are vaccinating those flocks as well. I use the word only 114 outbreaks because I think it is adequate given the sheer scale of poultry production and, of course, its density. Next slide, please. Here's just a table summing up the last 4 years of Newcastle disease here in Poland. You can see that 2025 was the worst because we surpassed the 8.5 million of birds affected mark. Next slide, please. Regarding the pathogen itself, it's of course the genotype 7, specifically the subgenotype 7.1.1. Next slide, please. And that genotype 7 we performed genome sequencing on this virus, and we linked it to the 2022 isolates detected in the Russian Federation. Unfortunately, we have no idea or we cannot trace the route how it got from Russia to Poland because we have no reliable information from Belarus. And although Poland is a very hospitable country, in the case of this particular guest, we would like it to just leave as soon as possible. Regarding clinical signs, you get really the usual ones. So it's acute dyspnea, it's severe neurological disorders, and in post-mortem examinations, we observe the classics like ulceric buttons or hemorrhagic lesions, especially in the proventriculum. And in broiler flocks, especially, host lethality is very, very high. We observe that from the start of the disease, the mortality spikes 5-fold every day. So in a matter of a couple of days, maybe a week, you could expect your flock to be on its way to Hades. The next slide, please. So recognizing the failure of, let's say, voluntary vaccinations, the Polish government, together with official veterinarians, have implemented a sweeping law that says that you must vaccinate your birds at day 0 or day 18 if you're in novo vaccinating, but within the hatchery, so they cannot leave the hatchery unvaccinated. And this law just bans or outlaws relying solely on one vaccination, because every farmer, every producer is just bound to perform at least one subsequent vaccination on the farm or on site, if you will. But the most scientifically rigorous component of this law is the 80% of seropositivity threshold or mark that you have to hit at the end of the rearing cycle if we're talking about broilers, or 100% if we're talking about layers. And could you, the next slide, please? And every once in a while, because every farmer is obliged to do that every cycle on every flock or every house. It doesn't matter if you have 15 houses, 1 or 2 or 3 flocks. You have to perform serological testing on each one of them. And every once in a while, an official testing is ordered, and an official vet is the one sampling, whether it be in the slaughterhouse or on the farm. And if you fail in that testing, a specific testing, to reach that 80% threshold, you will fall into a corrective program. And once that corrective program is implemented, the duration of it is 5 cycles. And during those 5 cycles, the 80% level must be achieved 3 consecutive times. So flocks falling below that 80% threshold just indicate critical vaccination execution gaps. The next slide, please. So why are we experiencing massive outbreaks, although we are, despite these sweeping legislative measures and mandatory vaccinations? The answer was given to you, the slide, the presentation earlier. It's basically the genotype gap. So between genotype 7, which is the field strain, and between genotypes 1 and 2, that are strains that are normally in the EU live attenuated vaccines registered in the EU. So classic vaccines elicit a robust immune response, of course, but it is a humoral immune response, and it consists of IgY. And IgY do not have really the ability to go to the or break the mucosal barrier and protect the mucosal surface on the upper respiratory tract. So the bird may be protected from death, but it still sheds the virus to other birds and into the environment. So in order to physically block the virus, we must prioritize. Can you switch the slide, please? Thank you. To physically block the virus, we must prioritize local mucosal immunity, specifically secretory IgA, and that must be achieved in all of the upper respiratory tract and in the Harderian gland, in the ocular orbit as well. Furthermore, in extensive field trials, we have observed or proved that the vaccination via drinking water completely bypasses the upper respiratory tract, and it leaves the primal portal of entry just basically unprotected from the virus. And vaccination via drinking water is more prone to some, let's say, execution errors, like a biofilm inactivation, or variable water consumption, or variable water quality, like iron levels, for example. Can I, next slide, please? So in order to, let's say, peak that mucosal immunity, we have designed a 4-step vaccination protocol using almost only vaccination via spray, because properly aerolized vaccination by spray perfectly mimics the natural route of infection of Newcastle disease, and direct physical contact almost immediately initiates or triggers the IgA immunoglobulins production. Next slide, please. So the first, without further ado, the first step of our 4-step protocol begins in the hatchery at day 0, and now we are already filling our obligations towards the official veterinarians and towards the government, and we are vaccinating those birds in the hatchery. And we would prefer to use, let's say, a mild strain, preferably genotype 1. Or of course genotype 2, but genotype 1 we observe that it is not so aggressive. You have to remember that neonatal chicks are very fragile. Their upper respiratory tract isn't really that much mature. Furthermore, we have basically no idea what the immune status of the flock might be, so that vaccine will be probably, let's say, consumed or sacrificed at the altar of MDAs. So we would prime those chicks with a fairly, let's say, mild vaccine. And next slide, please. So the next step of our protocol is at day 7 on the farm, when we use a coarse spray to vaccinate the whole flock. And now that the upper respiratory tract is a bit more mature, and the MDA started catabolizing, and the birds have been already primed at day 0, we can feel more safe to use a bit more aggressive vaccine, aggressive, of course, quote unquote. And we would prefer to use a Lasota strain. So now we're again introducing this antigen and again stimulating the production of IgA. And now the real, let's say, mucosal immunity starts, and it really starts to protect the bird from infection and possibly maybe shedding. Next slide, please. The third step of our protocol is again hyperstimulating the mucosal surface with a coarse spray once more, and this time we prefer to use Hitchner B1 or a V8 strain for this vaccination. And the V8 strain is highly advantageous here because although it has a fairly low ICPI, it generates exceptionally high titers. So we both induce local immunity and humoral immunity with it. So now we can say that by day 14, our upper respiratory tract is fairly safe from possible infection. Next slide, please. And at day 21, we like to perform vaccination via drinking water. And now that the upper respiratory tract is protected, in our opinion, we can use a cloned Lasota strain, a highly uniform one, and we can just boost that systemic humoral immune response of IgY to protect the birds from clinical signs, from death, and at the same time assure legal compliance. So we will probably hit that 80% or 90% sure that we will hit that 80% mark doing this, performing this vaccination properly. Of course, as I said before, this vaccination via drinking water is prone to some execution errors, but we use all the methods that we can, ice cold water, some stabilizer to minimize that risk. Next slide, please. You might think that this protocol is a bit labor intensive, but the results are undeniably clear. First, over 90% of the flocks that were subjected to this specific vaccination protocol or scheme have successfully, but most importantly, consistently achieved that 80% threshold of seropositivity. But more importantly, we must remember that we are not doing this whole vaccination scheme just for the sake of the 80% threshold. Our first and foremost motivation should be protecting the birds from Newcastle disease and the whole poultry production along with them. And this test has been put to this vaccination protocol has been put to the ultimate test, because we've put in flocks, subjected them to this specific protocol into previous hot farms that had outbreaks 2 or 3 months prior to the population, and never have we confirmed a subsequent outbreak or even a mortality event on any of those flocks. Next slide, please. And however, as any seasoned veterinarian knows, I see you, Jane. I'm finishing this is the last slide. Thank you. However, as I said, any seasoned vet knows that even the best vaccination protocol or best vaccination scheme is just not a silver bullet. So to truly eliminate, or at the least severely mitigate the threat of Newcastle, our daily operations must rest on 3 inseparable pillars. And you can see those pillars on this slide. Those are immunoprophylaxis, so our vaccination protocol, and of course biosecurity, because we have to maintain just uncompromising, ironclad standards to prevent the mechanical introduction of the virus to our flocks or into our farms. And of course, we always have to check our actions. We have to monitor, we have to adjust our actions if needed, and change the vaccines if that's the thing. So thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Oh, Jakub, thank you so much. And thank you to all of our speakers. It's so important, Jakub, to hear about the real world practicalities of implementing vaccination and control measures. And thank you for highlighting the vital importance of biosecurity, just as we were finishing there. So it's now my pleasure to hand over to my FVE board colleague Piotr for the panel discussion. And please, just as a reminder, do continue to add questions to the Q&A during the panel discussion. Piotr, over to you.
Thank you, Jane. Ladies and gentlemen, dear veterinary colleagues, I am very happy seeing such a wonderful attendance today, which clearly demonstrates just how significant and pressing an issue of Newcastle disease remains. The threat, which is now European rather than national in scale, and its consequences for animal health and food safety demand our particular attention and cooperation. We have got 3 advices, first from regulatory side, then from scientific one, and in the end on the practical one. So now it's time for the debate. Let me introduce shortly our panelists today, experts who agreed to share their knowledge and their experience with us. Let me introduce Dr. Ronald Günther from Germany. Roland is a specialist poultry veterinary consultant actively involved in commercial poultry field work, as well as advisory service. He is also active in applied research and industry collaboration, contributing to scientific studies of poultry health. And our second panelist is Professor Stanislaw Winiarczyk, who served as the Dean of Faculty of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Life Science in Lublin, in Poland, and the head of the Department of Epidemiology and Clinic of Infectious Disease at the same faculty, as well as a Vice President of the Federation of Veterinarians of Europe. Since 2022, he is the director of National Veterinary Institute and National Research Institute in Puławy. Let me direct the first question to Stanislaw concerning flock immunity and vaccine intake. Stanislaw, what role can national institutes and reference laboratories play in standardizing immune monitoring approaches?
Good afternoon. Nice to meet you all. Thank you, Piotr, for introducing me. Assessment of vaccination against Newcastle disease should not be limited to checking whether a flock has been vaccinated or whether vaccination records are complete. The key question is whether the vaccination program has produced an adequate sufficiently uniform and practically useful immune response at flock level. This is particularly important in intensive poultry production, where gaps in immunity in even part of the flock may create conditions for virus spread, clinical disease, and serious economic consequences. Serological monitoring is one of the most useful tools for assessing vaccine take, but it must be interpreted carefully. It should always be analyzed in the context of birth age, species, production type, vaccination schedule, vaccine type, method of vaccine administration, storage and handling conditions, and serological test used, and also the current epidemiological situation. An antibody titer that may be satisfactory in one production system or at one age may require a different interpretation in another context. For this reason, national research institutes and reference laboratories should play a central role in standardizing immune monitoring approaches. They can develop common sampling strategies, testing protocols, and interpretation criteria so that results are comparable and can be used for decision-making rather than being treated as isolated laboratory data. Reference laboratories can also support quality assurance by organizing proficiency testing, providing reference materials, and training both official and private laboratories. This is essential because inconsistent laboratory performance or different interpretation of thresholds may lead to different conclusions from similar field situations. Standardization, therefore, helps build confidence among veterinarians, producers, authorities, and trading partners. It is also important to communicate clearly what serology can show and what serology cannot show. Serology is mainly a tool for assessing vaccine take and the general level of humoral response in the flock. It is not direct proof complete protection, and it doesn't prove absence of field virus circulation. Immunity against Newcastle disease also depends on local, mucosal, and cellular responses, as well as on the quality of vaccine application and the level of challenge in the environment. The best approach is therefore integrated. Serological monitoring should be combined with clinical surveillance, reliable vaccination records, evaluation of vaccination procedure, and when needed, virological or PCR testing. In this way, immune monitoring becomes not only a laboratory exercise, but a practical component of disease prevention, early warning, and continuous improvement of vaccination programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Stanislaw. Thank you for these valuable insights. And you says that everything is important, you know, from one side is monitoring and the technique of vaccinations to achieve desirable effect. So we are staying at the same topic, but now I would like to direct the question to Ronald from the field perspective. Ronald, what are the most reliable and practical methods to assess vaccine take and flock immunity in commercial poultry operations? The floor is yours.
Thank you and good afternoon to everybody here in the webinar. vaccine take actually starts with a proper vaccination. And although we have repeatedly said it this afternoon, I can't tell you how important it is to have a really good vaccination technique available to vaccinate a high proportion of your birds at first shot. That means that you have to train your vaccine team or the vaccination team, or train your colleagues to do it in a correct way. So we need a standardization of spraying techniques, because I do think that the spraying, priming with coarse spray and boostering with fine spray is the appropriate method. Taking blood samples is one of the most practiced procedures in poultry veterinary medicine and for field veterinarians, so also for the poultry sector. So drawing blood samples in appropriate number is key to be able to see how your vaccine has been taken by the birds. This is widely established already in the poultry sector, and in short-living birds done usually at slaughter, and with long-living birds like turkeys or laying hens, it's done in between the cycles, so that you know where you are and how the vaccine has been taken by the birds. We have to strike that although a certain level has to be achieved, it is important to vaccinate for protection and not only for a vaccination scheme to fulfill certain requirements. We do combine different vaccine types, and now with vector vaccines available, a combination of vector vaccines and live vaccines and inactivated vaccines seems to be the best to reach a high level of protection.
The last sentence you have said, you mean broiler breeders, flocks, and also layers or turkey, because in broilers we are able to use inactivated vaccine as well?
No, it doesn't make any sense. Even there's still some doubt about the use of vector vaccines in broilers because of their short living time. This is more appropriate to long-living birds like turkeys or laying hens.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Ronald, for practical point of view. And now coming back to Stanislaw, thinking about harmonization of vaccine policy. So, Professor Stanislaw, what gaps still exist in surveillance, diagnostic, and system organization, please?
Well, there are still several important gaps in surveillance, diagnostics, and overall disease control. First, in the area of surveillance, one major gap is the lack of virological surveillance in vaccinated flocks of chicken and turkeys. Vaccination may successfully prevent clinical disease. It was mentioned today, but it doesn't necessarily prevent infection or virus shedding. This means that vaccinated birds can still silently spread the virus. The movement of apparently healthy but infected poultry may therefore undermine disease control efforts and reduce the confidence of trading partners. Another important concern is the limited knowledge of the epidemiological situation in backyard poultry, or as backyard or smallholders poultry. Newcastle disease virus is currently widespread in backyard flocks, which are subject to much less veterinary supervision than the commercial sector. Current evidence suggests that backyard poultry may represent an important reservoir of infection, but the true scale of virus circulation remains unclear. We also lack targeted monitoring of domestic waterfowl, such as ducks and geese. Evidence indicates that these species can also carry Newcastle disease virus because they are less susceptible to clinical disease, and infections may remain subclinical. They could act as a silent reservoirs contributing to virus persistence. In diagnostics, an important issue is the variation in the sensitivity and specificity of commercial ELISA kits used to evaluate vaccination effectiveness. Different kits may produce substantially different results regarding the proportion of birds classified as seropositive. This can lead to distorted interpretation of flock immunity and may even encourage the use of overly sensitive kits simply to meet required thresholds rather than to accurately reflect the true immune status of the flock. Another major diagnostic gap is the lack of DIVA-compatible systems, that is, tools capable of differentiating infected from vaccinated animals. Similar systems are already used in highly pathogenic avian influenza control in France and would greatly improve the detection of infection in vaccinated flocks. When discussing the minimum elements of successful Newcastle disease control strategy in Europe, it is clear that vaccination and routine biosecurity alone are not enough. A more comprehensive and coordinated approach is required. First, stronger surveillance and mandatory, I underline mandatory, vaccination of backyard poultry are essential. Backyard flocks currently remain one of the weakest points in the system and may play a major role in maintaining and spreading the virus. Second, live bird collection points and informal poultry distribution channels should be more closely monitored. These movement pathways are epidemiologically important and may contribute significantly to disease spread between holdings and within holdings as well. Third, stricter regulation of partial depopulation practices, known as thinning. It is necessary whenever the all-in, all-out principle is not respected. The risk of virus persistence and transmission increases. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this comprehensive explanation, Stanislaw. And I immediately go back to Ronald concerning disease prevention protocols. Ronald, what are the key success factors and common pitfalls in ensuring consistency of biosecurity and vaccination across integrated systems?
Thank you for the question. Integrated systems have the big advantage to have a straightforward plan and protocol for several aspects of disease prevention that are firstly establishing vaccination protocols starting from hatchery level through the whole production period, and thereby combining different vaccines, live vector and inactivates for best protection. So, as Jakub said, stimulating all parts of immunity, the local, the cellular, the humoral, and innate immunity, which means, again, training of people who are doing it. Secondly, biosecurity, you said it. There are several pitfalls, and as we have learned from Christian and from Professor Sauter-Louis, that people seem to be the factor number one, or at least number two, introducing virus into bigger flocks, which are usually vaccinated and should be well protected. So trying to avoid breaches in biosecurity, which is again teaching people how to do it repeatedly, not only once. Where are the gaps? Where are the pitfalls? To lower, you never can exclude it at all, but to lower entries of virus into the flocks. Third, to monitor really successfully at the end by checking blood samples, at least at slaughter, regularly on a regular basis. And integrators have the big advantage to have a streamlined process in them, because usually the slaughterhouse belongs to the integration, and therefore blood samples are easily sampled and fastly processed, and the result is fast available and is monitored very closely. And last but not least, cleaning and disinfection in between flocks, which should be a standard procedure in all flocks, and wherever possible, all in and all out procedures should be performed, because that lowers the likelihood of introduction a lot.
Thank you, Ronald. We all know there is much more to be said on this topic. Thank you for this practical and scientific advices. You know, training people is a key factor to achieve desirable effect of vaccination. But today I have very unpleasant job of keeping the time. So I think that we need to stop the panel discussion. Thank you for participating in this. And now I would like to move to questions and answer part of this webinar. I would like to invite our previous speakers, Sanna, Carola, Christian, and Jakub, to join us. And you know, you wrote the questions, and I got, you know, some questions from the office, which was organized by the office, but the question is from you. And the first question is for Sanna. Could you please comment on the benefits for a country, animal health, trade, or other, provided by the officially free status without vaccination? Sanna, briefly and shortly.
Hi, yes, thank you for this question. Well, I can be really short. Those are really up to the countries or the member states to assess or to decide on. So it shall have, it may have a trade implication, but this is really not something that the European Commission is involved with.
Thank you, Sanna. Because I am chair this panel, I can direct my question to you, because you said that the regulatory system says that the poultry vaccination, regarding vaccination of waterfowl, do you think these flocks should be vaccinated, even though there is no ND vaccine registered for waterfowl in the European Union?
Well, I don't have a reply to this question, actually. I mean,
we can directly go under cascade rules, because, you know, there
excellent.
there was, you know, some outbreaks in geese and in ducks, of course, as well. Okay, the next question. I have a next question from the audience to Jakub. Do you evaluate the damage of trachea epithelium after spray vaccination? Do you investigate the early immunosuppression done by A3B1 IBD varivirus on the vaccine tag?
Yes, we have seen some changes or some lesions in the trachea, but they were really not as severe as you might think. There's only one, I think, vaccine, which was one of the cloned ones that we used via spray, and we would not recommend using that one because you would observe some post-vaccination reactions. So is the choice of the specific vaccines is determined to not cause those lesions. So that's why we use a very mild at day 0, then a bit more aggressive at day 7, and then a Hitchner B1 or a preferably VH strain at day 14, and then a cloned one used via drinking water to boost that uniform humoral immunity. So of course, you can. It's still a vaccination. The birds will still suffer a bit from every vaccination, whether it be IB or Newcastle. So we don't see that as a real issue. The real issue is fighting Newcastle.
Thank you, Jakub. So the next question is, Christian, is yours. Do you recommend Ulster or Lasota antigen for vaccine immunity monitoring by AGI? Ulster is genotype 1 and Lasota is genotype 2, but it seems Ulster gives higher HI. So as it has been shown in the table today from German colleague, in addition, live vaccines in the European Union are genotype 1 and genotype 2, but probably live vaccine of genotype 2 expressing genotype 7 will be important. Also, do you recommend Ulster or Lasota for this new live vaccine immunity monitoring?
Okay, first of all, yes, monitoring serology, both are in our hands antigenically the same, so it does not really matter. And I know that sensitivity in some experiments using Ulsters seems to be better, but actually we are using cloned Lasota, so the clone 30. Concerning release of genetically modified vaccines having the genotype 7, this still awaits the confirmation by the EMA. Otherwise, it's a genotype modified organism, and while releasing those organisms is really restricted. Yeah, we will have to see. On the other hand, if we use serology, we know in infection experiments with a genotype 7, we don't see a big difference whether we use a genotype 2 or a genotype 7 antigen. So again, the hint, I'm sorry I'm not too long, but again, antigenically, those strains are no major variants. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this wonderful accent. Unfortunately, we have run out of time and no more questions can be answered today. I would like to thank you for your active participation and your thoughtful questions and answers. And at the same time, I would like to thank you, our expert, for the available answer. I have written 5 questions to you. I will write and send you by email. But now I am giving the floor back to you, Jane. Thank you.
Thank you, Piotr, and thank you, everyone. So we're coming to the end of today's webinar. I feel as though we could have had twice the length of webinar and not answered all of the questions that we have. But just to reflect on what we've discussed and to thank you all. And I also wanted to particularly thank Lauren and Wiebke from the FVE team for their brilliant organisation. So thank you, guys. So our speakers and our panel members have provided incredibly valuable insight into the European Newcastle disease situation, from the legal framework, the epidemiology and the lab to the field, and the really important aspect of the practical application of the vaccination and control measures, without which the regulations are basically silent, you know. So I think it's really important. I'd also like to just take this opportunity to thank our speakers and the panel members for sharing your amazing expertise, and also for all of the participants. We are up to 200 people on the live webinar, and for your questions during the discussions and the questions and answers session. I just wanted to reassure you that we'll aim to provide answers to all of your questions, and perhaps those 5 questions that Piotr also mentioned, in a report after the webinar. If it isn't for your contributions, our events are not meaningful and are not productive. So, another ask of you. There is never anything that comes for free in this world. And before we close, I'd like to just, if you could move on to the next slide. Thank you, Lauren. And this links to Piotr's question to Sanna about waterfowl. The FVE have an active survey collecting field experiences on veterinary medicine's gaps and needs for geese and ducks. This is the QR code for the survey, and we think you're a particularly valid audience for us to ask this question of. So please do either use this QR code or the link in the chat to fill in the survey, share your expertise and experience, and really help us to address these potential gaps for the future. That's it. We're on time. Can I just thank you all again for joining us today, and we look forward to continuing our collaboration in the future. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I see lots of waving.
Thank you for the applause, you know, that I see. So which means
It's
that it was very
lovely.
useful and, you know, very useful. We need such kind of webinars, live webinars.
Yeah. And all of our speakers and panel members, I hope will be able to just stay on as we close the webinar. It should have stopped soon.
Thank you.